There we go. And we're recording. So for this group of the presentation, Norm's going to be talking about creating a more efficient structure with double plastic. And the topics that he's going to cover are what is the purpose, what constitutes properly, where to put an inflator, where to get the air, identifying and fixing problems. And then at 10:30, we're going to be having the Q&A. So make sure that you get your questions in before then. Norm, take it away.
Thank you all for being here. And as Andy mentioned, we're going to be discussing how to make a structure more efficient. And the first way of doing that to allow for season extension is with double plastic with air in between. And I'd like to ask Andy to put up a picture of what an inflator looks like or what it can look like. The purpose of the inflator fan is to put a cushion of air in between two layers of plastic. That so it's intended as a static air mass, not something that's actually moving. I'm showing here like a fan that is hanging inside the structure, and it has a hose attached to it, and it's attached to the plastic. Now, this is a little bit different than what normally would be done simply because this is a lean-to, whereas the same concept applies for doing it as a greenhouse. Now, there are quite a few different stages of what is considered properly, and I'll ask Andy to switch over to the greenhouse picture, and then I will make some references to that. Because of the shape of a greenhouse, it is impossible to have a totally consistent air mass all the way through. First of all, it is pinched off at the edges where the plastic is attached. It is crossing the peak, which is another spot where it's impossible to get that. But the intent is that as much as possible, you get that 3 to 5 inches of airspace, which has been people have done some research, and that is the optimum. It is important to have the inflator mounted as high as possible and on the end where the prevailing wind is coming from. You have to remember that this inflator does not have a lot of power. So you want to be working with stuff that's going on outside rather than against it. So if like the near end was, for example, the downwind side, and you're pumping the air there, the wind is going to be pushing in that direction all the time, and you would potentially have trouble filling that cavity uniformly. The other thing that is important to remember, if all your electrical supply, for example, is at the front end, the prevailing wind is at the back end, it is important enough to have it at the other end so that even if that means running an extension cord from one end to the other, just so that you can have that at the prevailing end, that is really going to help the cause. In the case of the photograph that was shown, which is a single output inflator, obviously you have to make a choice of whether you're going to put it on the left side of the building or the right side. And again, you would always fasten it in the direction of the prevailing wind so that you're going to get the maximum benefit. Now, as people are installing that double layer, there are a number of different challenges that come up. One is, and this is mainly due to the fact that there is not, for a lot of our customers, a lot of experience in putting the plastic on. So they're scrambling to get this done and not always paying attention to all of the details. When you are putting that plastic on, it is important to always pull on the bottom layer, and just let the top layer lay, so that you have the capacity of like just kind of puffing up a little bit. And the one thing to keep in mind is, especially when you're putting the plastic on during cooler weather, the sun shining on one side of the building and not on the other is immediately going to cause stretching of the plastic. So when you have the plastic just kind of laying there, you have to be aware that laying there is going to act differently on the sunny side than it is on the shady side. It is important that when you're working along the sides, that you fasten it at the middle of the side, both sides first, and work towards the corner. Because this way you don't have to constantly remind yourself, don't pull, don't pull. Just make sure that the wrinkles are out. If you just go along the side, and especially if there is some extra wind involved, the breeze starts coming up, you're going to just be hanging on and trying to pull, and that is potentially going to create a domino effect. The one of the things that is very important to remember is that when you're going to put the plastic on, you make sure that all of the edges have been taken care of. Like anything that has edges will get wrapped. There's weeds on the ground that are removed, because what potentially happens when you get that plastic over and you have a hole in it, it's not that that plastic is going to immediately start coming apart and cause premature damage, but whenever you have a little hole, you are going to get leaking of the air. As soon as you have the leaking of the air, you're now getting movement of air. The benefit of the double plastic is dead air space. And so that's what, as near as possible, what you want to achieve. So it is important to make sure that you never have the holes. If you have a situation where one side is getting inflated and the other side isn't, especially in conjunction with colder weather, sometimes what's happening is that it will bind along the ridge. And so what you then need to do, again, remembering that this fan is a small output, and so there's not a lot of power behind it to inflate it. So what you would do is just put some soft hose or something like that in between the two layers of plastic, so that you would get an artificial space in between where the air can escape from the one side to the other. So these are some of the little tricks, and when people will call, you will typically get me sort of asking, what different things look like, even though they don't seem to be relevant. There are little things that, again, cause that domino effect, and will help you to identify them, so that once they're identified, then we can come up with a solution of how to work around it. So that is sort of the overview of getting double plastic on, and the and some of the things to watch for in advance. The like I said, made reference to the fact that it's important to be prepared. being prepared is one of the things that you can do regardless of what the weather is. And so when you've got the proper equipment, you've checked for the weeds, you've checked for all of the sharp edges, this is going to minimize the possibility of problems down the road. And it will allow you to, once you give the go ahead to start going with this, you can go to it as quick as possible to get the plastic tacked in place. And as soon as the plastic is tacked in place, you're starting to minimize the risk to you of potential damage. So that is the end of what I've had to say here. And now we're going to turn it over to questions.